Hey guys, welcome back. So for this one, we're getting into Kieron Gillen's Sins of Sinister, which in the larger picture is a story that's told much like Jonathan Hickman's Powers of 10. And part of the reason why is because back when we talked about House of X and Powers of 10, and Hickman took us through the multiple lifetimes of Moira McTaggart, at that time we were also told that there was a Sinister timeline, which we really didn't see much of because we were only able to read about it then. And I mean aside from the Powers of 10 issue 5 cover being a huge teaser. But as it turns out, with Sins of Sinister, Kieron Gillen is following very closely to what Jonathan Hickman described when he told us how this played out. So through the course of this playlist, I'm going to be referencing Powers of 10 and House of X, so we can talk about some of these coincidences down in the comments. But with that said, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so for Sins of Sinister, we begin by jumping forward 10 years into the future after Immortal X-Men issue 10, where at this point, Sinister has resurrected a much larger number of hosts who are laced with his DNA than the 4 that we were shown in Immortal X-Men issue 10. But also with how this is done, it's presented to us almost exactly like what we were shown with Charles Xavier in Jonathan Hickman's 2019 House of X issue 1. When even at that time, we were given a look forward into House of X issue 5, where for the first time, we were shown the resurrection process from start to finish in all of its glory. But in this moment for Sinister, 10 years into the future, instead of saying to me, my X-Men, like Charles did, Sinister says, to me, my me's. But with Kieron Gillen opening with this, which in my opinion is very much a nod to Jonathan Hickman's House of X and Powers of 10, he's given us a bit of a heads up that this event, much like Powers of 10, is going to take us to our 10-year, 100-year, 1,000-year points in time, with a few other moments along the way. But to start this off, we land at the end of Immortal X-Men issue 10, where we saw Sinister sentenced by the Quiet Council and taken into the pit, for us then to get the reveal just moments later that Xavier had been resurrected with Sinister's DNA. And as we continue from the events from Immortal X-Men issue 10, we find Emma Frost walking in on Charles with his diamond showing, and even with her telling him that it's too early and they need to keep this concealed, she then shows hers, only for moments later to have that followed up by the arrival of Hope and Exodus, who for a brief moment revealed their diamonds as well. But going forward, they're all aware that they need to continue to put on the show and act natural like nothing's changed, which on one hand for them it isn't too difficult because they are themselves for the most part, but they do got a little sinister in their system. But for the most part they are who they are. Because for example, this Charles, at his worst, he's either held back by who he is, or the Sinister that is a part of him on a genetic level is only capable of working with the worst of what's already there. And we'll see more examples and demonstrations of this as we continue. But for the time being, Charles, Emma, Hope, and Exodus, they're playing their roles and acting as their regular selves would have at the next Quiet Council meeting. Because for starters, with Destiny and Hope missing, Charles makes it seem as if they had fled when Sinister got caught, because the two of them weren't fully reformed villains. But then from here, Charles goes on to mention how Krakoa needs to share resurrection with the world. And in response, Emma goes off saying how we need to take care of our own first, we still gotta bring back Genosha, which are points that Emma has made long before. But once again, they are intentionally disputing this so that it seems to the other members of the council that their stance hasn't changed. But for every last one of them, Charles, Emma, Hope, and Exodus, they want this to go through so that humans can be resurrected and augmented with Sinister's DNA. And through the course of this, we get another moment where Hope uses her Messiah status to get Exodus to come around, which didn't work before, but this time he just agrees. But even still at this point, they're a ways off for having the resources to compensate the addition of human resurrection. And for a moment, Storm and Kate express that. But quickly Charles and Emma let them know that they already have some ideas, with Forge stepping in for Sinister and Emma's Cuckoo stepping in to handle the human imprints to make this dream of giving resurrection to everyone a little bit closer to being a reality. And just after this, we then jump forward a year later in New York with Ben Urich, where he set up this super secret meeting with J. Jonah Jameson, where we find that Urich has caught wind of what's going on. So he's asked Jameson to meet him in private, but before he lets him know, Urich needs to make sure that Jameson isn't compromised. So he injects him with his test that's designed to reveal if anyone has been compromised with a dormant X gene. And when he goes on to test Jameson, nothing changes. And with a sigh of relief, Urich then spills the news on everything he knows, and he goes on to say that the mutant gift, the limited X gene that guarantees immortality, it's actually a Trojan horse. And Urich thinks that there's some kind of para-personality embedded within it which can just take over a person at any time, or even perhaps it warps people, pushing their inner worst impulses, which are quite interesting guesses because both are technically right. But with him telling Jameson everything, he then turns around just to find out that Jameson is already compromised, and the test that Urich had used, it was a complete fake that was put out in the wild to lure in anyone who was paranoid. And unfortunately for Ben, it worked, and he's hauled off by a group of other Sinisters as Jameson sets his gaze on Spider-Man making web diamonds in the distance. But just after this, we then head over to Krakoa, where at this point we're still in the 1 year later time period. And it's here where we find Forge, who is now one of the Sinisters, building an orbital cannon, which is pretty much designed to lobotomize Krakoa, since making Krakoa quote-unquote one of the Sinisters is a much taller and way trickier order. But the interesting thing here that happens is when it's ready, Hope is the one who pushes the button, who once again is the mutant messiah, bringing doomsday. But also, if you guys remember, in our talks about Powers of 10, there was a little section where we were warned about Sinister's betrayal in the Sinister timeline, which included information about the fall of Krakoa, while also mentioning Generation 4 mutants with flaws baked into their design. And really the Generation 4 portion, it's something that's more so referring to the different attempts on the Chimera, and we'll talk more about multiple attempts in specific cases when we talk more about Nightcrawler. But also during Powers of 10, we were given a quote that said, "The nature of that man, Sinister, reaches far beyond any hope of redemption. There can be no salvation for the devil himself." Which once again just seems like we're seeing a version of the Sinister line, the Betrayal, unfold in the same format as Powers of 10. But with Krakoa out of the equation, your Sinister-infused Wolverine kills Doug Ramsey, and Emma Frost spins this whole thing as if it was an attack from Orchis. And now, because Resurrection is precious to everyone, you now have the Avengers teaming up with the X-Men, attacking the Orchis Forge together. And it's pretty crazy to see, especially with Tony Stark taking down Nimrod with ease. And for me, the fact that he's able to do it, that isn't so much surprising. But instead, rather, it goes to show that once the mutants' problem is everyone's problem, all of a sudden, something that could have been handled so easily, it's only addressed or taken care of once it's our problem. But with the X-Men and the Avengers working together, they just devastate Orchis. But even with the Orchis Forge destroyed, a few of their members managed to escape into space. But also with a number of people lost throughout this battle, Captain America tells Cyclops that he wishes that they had seen Orchis as a threat sooner. And it's here where Cyclops responds by telling Cap, like, yeah, Orchis fooled a lot of people with their propaganda, but really it's that elective X gene, it's the only way to keep people safe, which really is Cyclops feeding Captain America a whole lot of this "we're on the same side" talk, and Captain America totally buys it. But back over in brain-fried Krakoa, it's at this point in time where after a whole year, there's been enough compromised resurrections to where now Sinister can be set free. So he tells his Sinisters to keep up the good work as he heads over to Mirror Island, which on one hand is the reveal of his Moira lab being in this location, but also it's us getting a glimpse of seeing Sinister getting the place back up to snuff since he hasn't been there for quite some time. But while Sinister's here, he also gets his AI to make notes, of which he has titled The Incredible Genius of Mr. Sinister, Part 4 Trillion. And just to take a quick look at him, it's separated in 3 parts, with what practically is Sinister's entire game plan, with the 3 parts being the problem, the solution, and the methodology, with the problem being Dominion status. Hyper AIs will eventually consume us, which is precisely what Nathaniel Essex was rambling on about in 1895, when he spoke of machines birthing grander geniuses, and those geniuses making grander geniuses, and so on and so forth, which means for the original Sinister, even back in 1895, he understood the path of machines building machines that was coming, which we were shown in House of X issue 3. But aside from AI hyper Dominion status, Sinister's solution is to reach Dominion status before he's consumed, to where from there we start to get into his methodology, which is what we're watching unfold. Cause number 1, the Moira engine allows him to avoid mistakes, so if he messes up, save scum. Number 2, compromise the DNA database that powers Krakoan resurrection. 3, use that position to take over the Earth, which right there is more or less the phase that we're at right now, where we see Sinister in year 1. Number 4 is for him to use that full creative power that he's achieved to explore novel power sets in the true potential of mutant kind, which is something else that we were shown before, but I'll bring that back on this playlist when we're closer to that moment. Number 5, reset the timeline, because this allows Sinister to take all the information that he would gain over years so that he could implement it years in advance. Number 6, become something more profound than a god. And finally, number 7, gloat. which really is Sinister's entire plan, summarized. But then it's from here where Sinister begins to get into the more immediate future, because he tells his AI to commence his 5-year plan, to where it's then here where we get to see how some of these events unfold over the next 5 years, with one of them being the Juggernaut getting shrunken down and shot through a cannon to kill Thanos, who was traveling through the time stream, possibly on his way to get the Black Infinity Stone. But doing this scattered fragments of Thanos' brains across 2 billion years of history. But then next, we find that Dr. Doom attempted to recruit Namor, with him having suspicions of Krakoa, but Namor had already been compromised for some time. Emma Frost made sure of that. And then after this, with fake rumors getting spread about the Eternals attacking the mutants again, Arakko uses their 1-hour ticket to get Uranos to take the Eternals down. To where then next for the Fantastic Four, since there were doubts that Reed could be manipulated through telepathy, Ben Grimm was then compromised, and the Fantastic Four was set up to die the same way that they got their powers, with it being arranged that they go through a mission where they pass through cosmic rays just before they drift into the void. And then next, with the main members of the Avengers compromised, Captain America takes out the president and takes control of the US government, which was the climax of what was called the X-Men Avengers War. But this takeover isn't held for long, because eventually the X-Men come out on top, and from there forward the X-Men are called Earth's Mightiest Heroes. But at this point we then roll into the official 5-year mark. And it's here where Storm tells the Quiet Council that she has some concerns that she needs addressed, and she would go through them all, but they would literally be here all day. But this comes to a point to where Storm calls out Nightcrawler for not being quite the Kurt she's known for decades, and she assumes that he's a total imposter, until Sinister brings out the real Nightcrawler, who he's been experimenting on and hasn't quite got it right yet. But also with Sinister showing Storm the real Kurt here. This is one of the early examples of Sinister exercising step 4 of his methodology. But for Storm, this is the moment where she realizes that she's the only person here who has not been compromised. And Sinister admits that he couldn't just bring her in the same way he did everyone else, since Storm deleted her backup. So Sinister gets Emma and Charles to take the more manual approach. But for Storm, fortunately with the help of Lactuca, she's able to avoid getting brainwashed just long enough to call down for lightning and create enough space for her to get out of there. But for Sinister, he doesn't attempt to go after her, or even have anyone else go after her immediately, but instead he just picks up the pace on his plans. And for Storm, we find that sometime later she's made her way to Peru, and as soon as she landed, Destiny and Mystique were there waiting for her, you know, with Destiny being able to see the future and all. And when Storm gets there, Destiny tells her that they will lose if they're not smarter, and they must be on the same side. To where from here, we're then taken into the expansion of Sinister's now expedited conquest, with us first seeing Sebastian Shaw becoming Krakoa's emissary to the various hells. To where with doing so, unfortunately he has to die every time he visits another hell. But to get a seat on the Infernal Parliament, he's required to own a hell. And with Shaw's new position, he pulls some strings so that he can give Magic Surtur's Twilight Sword so that she could go to Asgard and serve Ragnarok herself. And just after this, Sinister said no more Wanda. And there's no elaborate explanation, because we all know why. And Sinister was like, you know what, I ain't taking no chances. But then it's from here where we're introduced to the first generation of Chimera, which at this point just has me like, man, Karen Gillan was paying close attention to the footnotes that Hickman had laid out when we were given the Sinister timeline in Powers of X, when back at the time we only read about the different generations of Chimera and how the failure rates increased with each one, as well as the trade-offs that came into play with those generations. So again, it's pretty crazy to see all this unfold, because next, just like clockwork, we're then told about the destruction of Mars. But in here we're also given the details that Generation 2 Chimera were sent after Storm, while an unhinged clone of Legion was sent into the planet's core and unleashed. But among the asteroid belt that was left in the aftermath, there's no confirmation that Storm was killed. And after seeing this, we then jump forward to year 10, where at this point people are lining up in huge numbers to pretty much be brainwashed. And at this point in year 10, it's not as if the public doesn't really know, but instead the world's so far gone that the people lining up here, they just don't care. And with seeing this, you got this one guy who's trying to stop everybody, but he just gets webbed up by Night Legion, to where from here he's pretty much gonna get the same treatment that Ben Urich got 9 years ago. And from here, as we continue, we go on to find out how for Sinister and the others who have been compromised, it's spread to a point to where there's no longer much of a need for anyone to hide their diamond anymore, which is a topic that comes up at the next Quiet Council meeting. But also with Sinister being surrounded by so many other Sinisters, we start to get the idea that he's done a bit too good of a job. Cause in this meeting, Hope brings up that there's still members of Orchis out in space, they hit Mars and they still can't confirm that Storm is dead, Cable's up there somewhere, and it won't be long before other galactic empires come after them. And with hearing this, Sinister's like he trusts the science, and they'll work out what to do if it comes to that. But then Emma's like, you know what, we should vote. Who wants to prepare for a little space war? To where then the vote's unanimous without Sinister. And he admits that he's surprised because he thought that they'd have just a little bit more loyalty. But I mean, at the same time, when everyone is Sinister, what do you expect? But from here, Charles, Emma, Exodus, and even Hope, the original four, they go on to tell Sinister that they're with him, but very much in the way that Charles, Emma, Exodus, and Hope would. Because even with Sinister's DNA laced in with theirs, they've come to a point where they're thinking a bit too much for themselves. So when Charles tells Sinister, like, sure, we're different, but we all stand together. And since we're all Sinisters, that doesn't mean we're all the same. And with hearing this, Sinister's like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. But as soon as he walks off, he's like, ah, nah, bump that, I'm finna save Scum. And he's talking to himself like, I knew I gave them too long of a leash. So for Sinister, he makes his way back to Mirror Island, to the Morva lab, only for him to then get there and find that it's gone. Because the worst fear of anyone who saves Scums has just come true for Sinister, because now all of his backup saves are gone, and he can't hit the reset without them. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/DopeSpill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.